Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Health Nexus webinar on FASD, COVID-19, and aggression. And before we start with our presentation, I want to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. So it's important to do this land acknowledgement, even though we're on a virtual platform, and take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands and which we call home. And we do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their culture. So from coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nation people that call this land home. And please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we are and can each in our own way try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. In addition to that, I want to mention quickly that the topic we're going to discuss tonight is difficult and it may hit home for many of you. It's important to acknowledge that if you're uncomfortable, if you're feeling that this is too difficult for you, you may stop listening. You may listen to the recording later when you'll be ready. I invite you to look at resources that are available if you need support. So for instance, there's the Ontario, Connects Ontario 1-866-531-2600 or Indigenous Hope for Wellness Helpline 1-855-242-3310. And that's for non-life-threatening emergencies. If you ever have life-threatening emergencies, please call 911. I want to introduce today our guest speakers, Maude and Lauri Cabral. And I myself is Pascal Gagné, the FASD team lead at Health Nexus. Maude Champagne is a neuroscience PhD student at Queen's University under the supervision of Dr. James Reynolds. She is also a registered social worker, psychotherapist, and speaker. She has a private practice at Ottawa Center for Attachment and Trauma Therapy. And Maude has an MSW with a thesis on the experience of parents raising children with FASD and developmental trauma during the dyadic developmental psychotherapy. And her research interests are around neurodevelopmental disorders, program evaluation, and developmental trauma. Lauri Cabral brings 25 years of experience in policy, human resources, strategic administration, and conflict resolution. She has led management committees in the collective bargaining process, developed policies, managed teams in the delivery of equitable services to workers in the public and broader public sectors, and was recognized for ability to develop mutually beneficial solutions in high conflict situations. She has worked as a negotiator, a manager of operations, director of human resources, and as an executive advisor. And she is certified in dispute resolution with the Canadian International Institute of Applied Negotiation. Two people with a broad range of experiences and involvement in the field of neurodevelopmental disabilities and FASD. We're very happy and excited to hear what they have to say today. So that being said, I'm going to turn over to our guest speakers today, Maude and Lauri.
Thanks, Pascal. I'm going to start. So I'm Lauri Cabral, and I'm logging in tonight from the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, and I find it timely to be together on the eve of our first National Day of Reconciliation. So thanks, Pascal. What Pascal didn't mention about me is that for the last 5 or 6 years, I worked with Adopt for Life, the voice of adoption, kin, and customary care families in Ontario. And during my time there, I worked primarily as a regional parent liaison. And it was kind of this work that led me into being particularly, I guess, proactively interested in working with families where they were experiencing aggression from the children in their family units. So Maude and I, actually Maude, did you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yes, I could. I mean, we had decided we would add whatever Pascal was missing. Lauri and I know each other for many years now through Adopt for Life. I'm also an adoptive parent. I have 5 children. Some of them have neurodiversity as well. None of them have FASD, but they have, neurodevelopmental disabilities. So I'm quite passionate about this topic, and I'm also a psychotherapist and social worker. And Lauri and I always had mutual interest, and we're meeting in the community about different things. And this is something that I guess has been our latest project or interest.
So I guess I wanted to start with why we chose the title, A Tornado Moves Through the Family. Maude and I have worked with families experiencing this for quite a while now. And I think we've tried to come up with a concept that really relates to what the families we work with experienced. And so this conversation, first of all, I want to say is not specific to families parenting children with FASD. We work with adoptive families that have experienced developmental trauma. Lots of our families do have children with FASD, and some of them are on the autism spectrum or may have other neurodevelopmental issues. But I think that it's particularly relevant to the families parenting children with FASD. So I'm hoping that you'll find it useful to you. And I also want to say, we're on a journey here. There are a team of people, and we will talk about those people as we go through, that are helping us put in context what we're calling aggression in childhood and adolescence towards families. It's not a done deal. We're not going to have all the answers for you, and I hope you won't expect them, but I hope you will get interested in journeying along with us as we go through this. And remaining curious and asking questions and reaching out to Maude and I after. I think our email addresses are at the end. Today, we're really going to talk about why we're here, what it is, why we're here, what we've learned so far, and what we're planning moving forward. First, the why. We're talking about aggression in childhood and adolescence within families. We're talking about patterns of aggression towards, often mostly directed, I guess, towards parents or siblings, sometimes directed towards other people living in the home. And the level of it is outside of what a family can sustain over time in a healthy manner. And what we'll talk about too is the fact that usually this phenomenon is hidden, sometimes to protect others in the family, but regardless of the reason, sometimes it's shame or feeling that they should be able to handle something that's really outside of the range of what they could be expected to handle. But either way, it ends up with a lot of these families living in isolation. I'm sure many of you know what I'm talking about out there. And there is a stigma associated with it. So we kind of feel like it's like a tornado that comes into the family. This aggression is persistent. It's difficult to sustain parenting in those situations, and it changes everybody in its path. We put up a statement here that you can read or not read. For some of you, you're going to recognize it. But when Adopt for Life first began several years ago, we were seeing many of our families experiencing this. It became that most of us within Adopt for Life actually don't think it's that exceptional. We figure there's about 30% of the adoptive community that experience aggression in their homes that's outside of what we would normally expect. So as we started in this journey of trying to work with our families, a lot of questions were coming up. You know, what kind of supports are they getting in the community? Where can we find resources? Where are the parenting courses that are not standard? And I spoke often with Maude about this. I'm sure we'll each have stories as we go through this, but there was a lot of debate within Adopt for Life, a lot of debate outside of Adopt for Life, but a lot of goodwill developing in how we represent families that are experiencing this. When we spoke with police, many people understood that this was happening. Many people in the FASD community understood that this was happening, but nobody was really talking to each other about it. So in January of 2021, just as an example, Adopt for Life sent out a 24-hour questionnaire, and within 24 hours got 140 responses back. 74% of those families were saying that they are experiencing aggression directed towards them or their other children and from another child living in their home. And 46% of those people, the 140 responses, 46% said that it had increased during COVID.
Thank you, Lauri. Before I get into my this slide, I will just say that I think it's been years that Lauri was mentioning to me that she was hearing from the community that many parents did not feel heard from therapists about their experience of the aggression from their children or their youth. They didn't feel like the therapist or social worker were really understanding or even asking the questions or had solutions for them. And to be honest, I was very hesitant. I was like, I don't know. I think I'm doing that. I think I'm hearing my families. And with many, I mean, we worked in a certain way and the violence disappeared. And with some, it stayed, but we sort of managed. So honestly, I was hesitant about this topic at the beginning until really last year when we had a grant to do a study at Able2. You may know them from citizen advocacy. That's how they were called in the fetal alcohol resource program. And we were asked to do a study on service adaptation because of COVID. Like they were doing their services in person, but they had to move online. And it wasn't so much about their well-being, but we did have those questions. So we had about 17 or 18 people responding to a survey, and we also had 10 interviews with families. And what really stood out in the interviews is the caregiver who were mentioning dangerous behaviors. So here on my slide, you have the 10 interviews, and there's 8 that are darker. So these are the ones that mention the child having some sort of aggressive behaviors, and we chose to call it dangerous behaviors. And out of these 10 people, we had 3 families experiencing placement instability. Placement instability is either the child was no longer living in the home, or the family was considering having to find a different placement for the child because it was just no longer safe to keep the child at home. When I say child, I'm including youth. It's just easier for a francophone. And so when we did our research, we realized that the ones with the placement instability were also the ones with the highest rate of dangerous behaviors, both in terms of severity and in terms of the amount of times they were sharing that in their experience. And to be honest, it wasn't like the aim of our question. So that was sort of in a way surprising. I mean, I'm hearing it as a therapist, as a social worker, but still, you know, having all those details, and like it kind of became the central theme of our research. And I have to mention, all these kids had FASD, but they also had trauma or some sort of attachment disruption. All these children were adopted at different age. So Pascal may have mentioned I'm part of the Kids Brain Health Network research network. And within this research network, we focus on FASD, autism, ADHD, different neurodevelopmental disorders. But what we try to do is to hear from the voices of youth and families, people from who have the live with experience, and not just decide on what we will research based on their own interests, but based on what people need. So my entire PhD was supposed to be on something else, but when this came out, we thought, oh, okay, we need to address this as a community. And then I knew Lauri was, you know, doing this work at this point. So we decided to partner and started the work that we'll present today. And there's different initiatives. So first of all, when these were my findings in my research, I started looking at other research in FASD, and I'm quite familiar with it because that was the entire topic of my master's degree, and I've been in this field since 2006. So I'm familiar with it, but in a way, it's like these this topic was sort of like melted among other things. And it's never been at the forefront of any research we've done in FASD. So this is a good example, and the need assessment that was done in 2014, she interviewed professionals and she interviewed 60 caregivers across Canada. And when she asked, what's the hardest situation for you and your child to deal with, temper tantrums, violence, and aggression were the highest rated items. And so violence and aggression was like more than half the people when you think about it. And just in my master's degree, I interviewed 5 families. 3 of them talked about the violence. If you're thinking of the surveys they've done on caregivers, I remember reading one of the survey and someone said, it's like living in a war zone. And yet we have all these research saying this and caregivers screaming to get help, and yet we don't really have any intervention to address this at this point. So this is where we start having an interest in it.
Yeah, so I think too, what we have to understand is this is a fairly new topic worldwide, really. If you look at this timeline, I think the same thing has been happening everywhere, where, you know, we as parents understand what we're dealing with, but nobody really had any language to address it. And when you don't have language, you can't really deal with something. You can't explain it to other people simply. And when you're in crisis, it's the last thing you want is to have to explain it at that level. So really, if you look at this timeline, what we're trying to show is this is new worldwide, but here in Canada, it really came to light because it was families that we were working with in Adopt for Life, and particularly one determined parent who came across some literature that was coming out of the UK and Europe. And she got a small SPARK grant from the Mental Health Commission of Canada, who saw, like, gosh, we don't really know much about this. And so she was part of our inaugural working committee. There was somebody else from Adopt for Life and myself and a parent. And we started, you know, running support group meetings and having speakers come in to talk about it, and getting our own staff more up to speed on it. And what we were realizing is that everybody was a little bit all over the place on it. Maude, you'll see in 2020. So from 2019 to 2020, you all of a sudden have some research starting in this area. Maude with a MyTax grant, which, are you going to speak about that later, Maude? I think so, eh?
Spoke about the MyTax.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're starting to see some research results coming up, sorry. And then in 2021, we kind of decided to develop what we call a consortium, and I'll go into it in a second, but we're moving kind of into what we've learned. So move forward. So as we move forward, what we decided we wanted to do was really look at a holistic way for Canada. So, you know, we're trying to plug gaps without really having a common identifying definition, or even what to call it. So a few of us, Maude, and with her work at Health Nexus and Adopt for Life, kind of came together and funded, working together, kind of funded the idea that we would develop a consortium. And this consortium is really built on being humble and being present and listening to people so that we can come up with ways of addressing this. This quote is something that came out in the first phase from one of the families. And I think it's particularly important to understand what's being said here. You know, it's important to maintain the awareness that some parents live in an extremely high level of risk, injury, or death. And should this result, the child becomes more at risk of falling into the foster care system, experiencing legal consequences, or homelessness. And in that statement, what we're seeing is it's everybody in that circle that's suffering. And staying silent is really not a particularly helpful option. So we'll go to the next one where I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the consortium. And for those of you who want answers, I know it's a little frustrating to hear this, but it's important for us to walk along this journey together and realize that there is lots happening and lots being done about this. You have some very strong advocates that are sitting around the table. But the consortium was brought together, the first phase of it, just to try and get a shared understanding, some language that we could use when we're talking about it. An assessment of what's happening in people's homes right now. What does it look like? What did police say it looked like? What do therapists say it looks like? And then, you know, the phase 3, which we just finished last week, is really understanding the gaps and the blocks and the barriers to actually getting families what they need to be successful. And phase 4 is coming shortly. I think the dates are a little bit off because it's in mid-October. And then there'll be a final report that we can actually use as a baseline to talk to organizations that may be able to help us look at multifaceted ways of addressing this. So we'll go to the next slide. Just to explain how we did this. So we took a really phased approach to this. And in the first phase on the top, you'll see the families. So it's parents, it's caregivers, and it's the first voice advocates. And in that group, we have people who are young adults now who either experienced the aggression from a sibling or in a group home setting, or that actually used aggression against the people that they loved or towards the people that they loved. And we had Adopt for Life there at the table representing adoptive families. And we had a support network from British Columbia also present, mainly representing biological families. And then we had a group of first voice advocates. We also brought practitioners to the table. So we had psychotherapists, psychologists, and OTs at the table talking about it, listening. And we brought social systems. So we brought police officers together, probation officers, child welfare workers, and we brought academics to the table as well. So the University of Ottawa is represented, Queen's is represented, University of Saskatchewan and the University of Quebec are all represented. There's psychologists, criminologists, and social work. And then there are policymakers. So there are people from the federal government, and there are also people from former provincial government workers to try and help us come up with an overall strategy. So in the first couple of phases, very persuasively, we heard mainly from parents, and we heard mainly from first voice advocates. I think in total there were 100 people that we spoke to that either filled in questionnaires or were part of focus groups, and they really helped put this thing in context. It was extremely moving. So if we move to the next slide, we'll see that out of the families and caregivers that we worked with throughout this process, 75% of those families were reporting that they had frequent ongoing aggression in their homes. So that's daily or weekly escalations. And that the intensity was higher than most people expected. On a scale of 0 to 10, over 50% of them were saying it was between an 8 and a 10. So this is serious, threatening aggression that's occurring in many people's homes. Just 1 second, I'm gonna stay on that for 1 second. I wanted to just say that the parents talked a lot about withdrawing from other people. They talked about the impact on the entire family. They talked about seriously worrying about siblings. They talked about having other children in the home that were experiencing symptoms of PTSD. They talked about changing their own behaviors so that they didn't aggravate their child. And yet at the same time, they often talked about the empathy that they had for the child, coupled with the exhaustion that they were experiencing as care providers to the child. And many said they withdrew because when they tried to raise these issues with therapists or social workers or anybody, that they felt that it was minimized, that it wasn't taken seriously, that nobody truly understood this, so they just stopped talking about it. Many of them had isolated themselves from friends, former friends, from families. They didn't feel that they could explain the situation without causing harm to their other children or feeling incompetent themselves, that they weren't somehow parenting enough. And then one of the most interesting things I think most of us would say was the voice of the first voice advocates that came to the table. And one of the worries going in was, by talking about this, are we going to cause harm to the children? Is it somehow stigmatizing to them? And they actually said overwhelmingly no, because nothing can change in our lives if we don't talk about it. They talked a lot about their inability to communicate in a socially acceptable way. One person said that behavior was their first language. So they talked about their difficulties with self-regulation in environments that they felt weren't adapted to them. Quote of, sometimes I'm overstimulated and I panic. They talked about the pain and the difficulty of expressing their feelings or what they need, that they can't get it out, that they want somebody to help them. And one of them said, my response to pain was not acceptable, so I tried to lock it away. So you see this, trying to close it down, and yet it's spewing up. And young people talked about, when you live in chaos or you start your life in chaos, you don't know what to do with all of these feelings. So it really gave this other lens of, this is almost, it's not just about parents. It's actually everybody in that family unit that's suffering and that needs all of us to do our part in supporting and trying to figure out ways to support. One of the first voice advocates said, parents shouldn't have to scream so loud in order to get help. And another urged us to intervene before love gets threatened. And they said that's not fair to anybody. So I say these things to remind us that this is multifaceted. This is really so many different pieces to it, but so much hope through the fact that everybody actually wants a solution.
Mm-hmm. Can I just add, Lauri, to this, that, in FASD, we're quite concerned about adding stigma to this population because they're already so stigmatized. And that was kind of one of my reservations and the reservations of so many other professionals, I think, and even parents, to talk openly about the aggression and even the violence felt uncomfortable for many of us. So when I wanted to share the results of the MyPACs, we consulted with individuals who live with FASD, either adults, youth, and caregivers, and asking them, how can we talk about this in a way that's non-stigmatizing? Because caregivers need to be validated, they need the support, and the youth need the support as well. Because we know one of the consequences is placement breakdown, and that's damaging for so many, or injuries or trauma and other people in the family. So, I realize we need to address this and discuss it, but in a way that's non-stigmatizing. And even for me, calling this a tornado felt like, okay, that's in a way to externalize it. It's not just the child. It's, there's this thing that happens in real life. There's wind in every family. But for some family, there's a really strong wind that can be really scary, and that is unpredictable. So we need to safeguard around this family in some ways. So yeah, I think we're just learning to discuss it in a way that's non-stigmatizing. safe.
And I think even, as you know, throughout the consortium, a lot of people expressed concern about language. And, you know, at Adopt for Life, we had initially borrowed the language child to parent violence and aggression. And we were, you know, getting quite used to it, but with a worry that it was being imported from Europe. And I think what we found as a result, and Maude, of course, you're on the consortium, so you know this, but that we wanted language that was not further stigmatizing. That one of the main principles is don't do any harm, but it causes more harm if we stay quiet than if we can all put our minds together and figure out ways to not further stigmatize these families, these children, and provide them the help that they need to move forward.
And just to answer, like, some people were asking, like, will you get into practical strategies? I know a lot of caregivers, that's what they want, but at this point, we're still trying to figure out what are the proper strategies. You know, when I'm a social worker, a psychotherapist, I have a lot of time with the families to analyze, like, is it sensory, you know, is it de-escalation, like back and forth, like what's really going on? And we can't just take an hour and give you like easy strategies that might not work for your specific situation. Like, even for someone who has FASD, there may be different cause of why the person displays aggression towards family members. So we're trying to be careful here to not, you know, say things that could be damaging. We're more talking about what we're planning, what we're trying to do, and then you'll see there's some things though that we're learning that are, I guess, I would say common practice. Like, one of them, or I'll mention it now, is we learned this from the UK people, that violence, I shouldn't say violence anymore, aggression thrives in secrecy. And people, they keep it a secret because people in the community don't understand. So they're being judged and shamed and blamed, and they want to avoid that for their child as well. They don't want their child to be blamed and shamed. So they keep it a secret, and sometimes that's when it starts to thrive. So one of the ways to address it is to bring it to light, to start talking to people, and in a non-stigmatizing and non-blaming way. And of course, there's methods to try to find the right people to be supportive of the family. So that's one of the key aspects of it that I learned in social work, but we're not super good at applying it, I guess. Okay, so I'll talk about my scoping review, and I won't go into the details of it because it has to be peer reviewed before it's published. So I'll just gonna give you some of the things that I've learned while doing it. So a scoping review is basically a literature review, very broad, to see, okay, what's out there on aggression towards family members in FASD. And honestly, there's not much. So etiology is basically the cause. And what I saw is that there was many papers on, let's say, the fact that someone who's prenatally exposed to alcohol will have more conduct disorders, more behavioral issues than other neurodevelopmental disorders. Also, there's a lot of brain imaging showing the damage done to the brain and how that will affect the person's behaviors. We also know from animal studies, from human studies, how the HPA pathway is dysregulated for someone with FASD. So HPA pathway is basically the stress response in your system, and that's dysregulated. So basically, we know that there's biological reasons why these children act the way that they do. I also found that there's aggravating factors. For example, trauma is an aggravating factor. So if the child was exposed to neglect and maltreatment, we know it affects the brain and the child's functioning, and that might make it worse. And there's also, in one study, they talk about sleep and sleep deprivation, and I'm sure a lot of us can relate. Sleep deprivation can strongly affect the person's behavior. And in FASD, 90% of the children have a sleep disorder. So now that I know that this is usually something I look at with the families I work with. Okay, how's the child sleep, and can we address this? And sometimes that really helps for the behavior. When it comes to the intervention, I only found 4 interventions that were addressing disruptive behaviors, and sometimes they call it externalized behaviors. So they all have like different names: disruptive, externalized, emotional regulation issues. That's usually how it's called. But it's sort of like putting everything in the same pot. And I'll talk about it and why this is an issue. So basically, they're having the same intervention to deal with the child who's like jumping on the couch versus the child who's like hitting the parent until the parent has to be hospitalized. So, there's a mismatch here. And yeah, so we don't have any intervention that's for addressing aggression specifically. So there's a big gap in the literature, and to be honest, we don't have many interventions aiming at dealing with emotional dysregulation in the child with FASD. And often they're just looking at the child. They're not looking at the parent to child interaction and how we can modify either the interaction or the environment to help the child regulate or help the family stay safe if the child's completely dysregulated. And while I say that, I know there's no easy solution, and I don't think we'll have one intervention that's going to solve everything. Like, it's the same with autism. It's a spectrum. And for some children, sometimes we have to look at alternate caregiving arrangement because it's not doable within a family. So this is something else I wanted to talk about, and that's more of a reflection than a finding. I was talking to other researchers in the UK, and they're like, oh, we didn't think about it in these terms. So if I go back to my analogy of the tornado, I mean, tornadoes, basically it's the wind, not that I'm an expert in meteorology, but okay, so you have wind in every family. Okay, and that could be like a microaggression when the child misbehaves. So jumping on the couch, you're trying to work, they're interrupting, or they're lying, not sharing their toys, fighting a little bit with siblings, arguing, fairly normal. But for an FASD, sometimes it's too much, and that becomes microaggression, and it's annoying, and they get like, it could be even a case of burnout in some parents. And then you have severe tantrums, like throwing things, and to a certain degree where we have families sharing, like they were seriously injured, scared for their life, the life of their other children, and they're quite traumatized. And you also have the aspect of the individual who's receiving it. And that's something, Laura, that we heard a lot in the consortium from families. Sometimes it's the degree of the aggression, but sometimes it's how it's received. So if a caregiver experienced abuse in their life, some things that are more like an orange, severe tantrums might be very threatening for a caregiver, and they still need to be validated and supported in what they're experiencing. So we all have a different buffer, and yet we need to address, like, validate the experience of the caregiver throughout this process. And so that's something that's just wanted to mention. It's not in the research, and I think at some point we'll have to find like a system to sort of evaluate that in the families. Like, where you're at on that spectrum, where do you situate yourself? Do you fear for your life? And so that might need a different intervention than just feeling like you're having microaggression, for example. And what we're planning, that's the exciting part. So like I said, we won't have like one solution, but we're trying to come up with different strategies that will include policy, and that will include this super nice project. So Lauri had found this intervention called nonviolent resistance. It was originally created in Israel at Tel Aviv University, and it was for biofamilies who were experiencing aggression from their children, but it was adapted to neurodiversity, ADHD, autism. It was adapted to trauma, children in foster care, like tons of conditions. And we partnered with psychologists from the UK. Their group is called Partnership Project UK. And they have adapted it to a trauma-informed version of NVR. So we've partnered with Adopt for Life for the recruitment, my university, and Kids Brain Health Network to do a pilot. We'll have at least 5 families participating in the pilot. And I actually had my ethical clearance like just this week, so I'm really excited and scared. I will talk a little bit about NVR, but I just wanted to give the warning, don't try this at home. So when we started talking about NVR, we had people going online and going like, oh, I'm not sure it fits with trauma, I'm not sure it fits with FASD, and trying some of these things. But NVR is very popular in the UK. So a few people have blogs or their therapist and they talk about it, but it's not the adapted version. So I'm just saying, I'll talk about it. You can go online, find information, but you have to be careful. That's why we're not giving like basic strategies tonight. So nonviolent resistance is based on Gandhi's work. And I found that interesting. It's basically, it's not like turning the other cheek when there's violence or an aggression. It's resisting the violence, and it's non-confrontational, non-punitive, non-blaming, non-shaming, everything we want with FASD. And they use the analogy of the parent anchor. So if you're thinking of the tornado coming, the parent's like an anchor. And we use that too in attachment. Like the parent has to be the stable base for the child. When I say parent, I'm including caregivers, all caregivers. And there's 4 elements. One of them, like I mentioned before, it's this supportive network that has to be present. It's not something you can do alone. And we'll have to find supporters that play different roles. It's about self-regulation in the parents to be able to co-regulate, lots of de-escalation techniques, and it's increasing the parental presence and structure within the household. Not everybody needs that. Like a lot of the caregivers that I work with, like they're really good at structure, but sometimes it's targeting just certain behaviors, not all of them. It's just sort of reorganizing the way we do things. And presence is more about, so I'll just give the example that when a parent becomes very traumatized by the situation or just by raising a child who's not neurotypical, it can become very, very challenging, and we lose our presence. It's hard to be emotionally regulated and connected and engaged towards the child. So it's trying to bring it back to a safe, bring back a safe interaction between the caregiver and the child. So that's basically what it is. I'll take some questions if some people have questions on it. Yeah, I'll let you do it, Lauri, and I'll see if there's questions for us.
Okay. Yeah. So gosh, I kind of forget what I was going to say now. I got so interested in the NVR thing. I think too that when we talk about the NVR, one of the things that we liked about it is that it's not minimizing what the parent is feeling. So it's not like take on more. It's teaching you how to do things differently. So it's acknowledging the difficulties and helping you move forward. So sometimes I know a lot of the families we worked with just were so exhausted from day-to-day living to tell them to go for another parenting class, or it feels like your beaker's already full and then it's just overflowing. Whereas what we liked about this is that it's not about that. It's about changing the way you see the issues and changing how you address them. So yeah, so this was just another quote from the consortium. We've gathered up so much valuable information, and I really am excited to have the report come out at the end of the year, because I think there'll be a lot for each of us to learn from it and to look back and say, yeah, I feel like that. It's like we're hearing the same message from multiple places, and now people are finally listening. So there's also the University of Ottawa survey that's being done with Adopt for Life, and that one is specifically for adoptive parents. And I see, Pascal, that we don't have the link for that. Oh, there, Pascal just found it. So so any adoptive kinship or customary care families that are experiencing this, I would ask you to consider filling out the survey. It's open until the end of November, and it'll really be the first piece of Canadian literature looking at prevalence. Like, what does it look like in Canada? What are people really experiencing? And then we have obviously Maude's research, which is let's look at an intervention and see if it's actually helpful to families. So that will be an extremely, I think, useful addition to how we see it. And we also have Karine Tremblay from the University of Quebec that's looking at the parental experience. And her research is all around you know, how parents become traumatized, just calling it like a filial trauma, or a trauma that comes from parenting. So that's an interesting piece of research that's being done right now as well. Is there more, Maude, that I'm forgetting, or?
Well, no, and I think what we didn't say in the consortium too, because I was looking at the questions, and you know, caregivers were saying, what about school? You know, what about the system when we talk about it? And that's the whole point of the consortium. Like, in VR, to me, like, I'm excited about my project, but that's like one little piece of the puzzle. You know,
Yes.
it's therapy for the parents. It's like another way to manage. It's like another tool in the toolbox, but we need systemic change as well.
Yes.
Like, and then VR, like in our pilot, they will work with the school as well. I think that's really important. But I think like within the consortium, we'll have a report and a series of policy recommendations, both in terms of first responders. They need trainings in FASD, they need trainings in trauma, like even like how do you manage like that kind of family situation in a non-stigmatizing and supportive way. Even it's the hospitals, you know, a lot of their families, they just end up at the emerge, nothing's happening, they're sent back home. So, you know, there's a gap here. So anyway, we're still working on these recommendations with people we know better than us about these things. And I think it's going to be like a few pieces of the puzzle to try to.
But the idea is to look at it from a holistic approach. So as Maude's saying, you know, looking at, you know, definitely stigma is a part of this. So, you know, to do that, we have to educate, as you say, schools, doctors, psychologists, therapists. Then we have to have interventions that work. So we need to have, you know, processes that are evidence-based, that can help with the aggression in the home. We also need respite, because sometimes the families are getting exhausted, they're tired, and we need to look at that differently. So there's a whole bunch. It's all kind of coming together, and we're not speaking about it as eloquently just because the recommendations are really just coming together. But maybe Pascal will invite us back in a couple of months to talk about the results of the consortium and what they've recommended. Or maybe we'll just make sure you guys have access to the report. One of the things that impressed me really was the interest. You know, we assume that people aren't interested, that people aren't engaged in helping, and that's really has not been our experience. That once they understand this, it was really a lack of knowledge and understanding that was preventing them from looking at this issue the way we need them to look at it in order to provide help. As we saw with our friends in the consortium from British Columbia, families with biological children are also experiencing significant amounts. And, you know, neurodiversity again exists in both biological and adoptive families. And adoptive kin and customary caregivers, of course, yeah. And even kids living and growing up in alternate arrangements.
There was a question on NVR and asking if it's evidence-based. So NVR is, we would say it's evidence-based. There's lots of research that has been done on NVR, lots of clinical trial. However, the research is usually done like there's a little bit on autism, a little bit on ADHD, a little bit on here, a little bit there, but nothing on FASD. So it's not evidence-based yet for FASD. That's why it's adopted. The NVR trauma-informed version is not online. And from my knowledge, there's no one trained in Canada. I will be trained soon. And that's why we're doing the pilot in the hope that if it works well, then we can start training more people and implementing it in different communities. There's different levels of NVR too, right, Lauri? Like some people are just NVR informed, so they will know how to get started with the families, while, yes, you know, the pilot that we're doing is with psychologists and they'll treat the caregiver's trauma as well, yes, from what they've been experiencing. And that's just another level of NVR that is very, that requires quite the expertise. And if you're looking at finding more information on NVR, I'll put in the chat the website of the creator, and he has the whole literature list of all the research that has been done so far.
So I just want to say thank you for the presentation, Maude and Lauri. We have 15 minutes left for questions, and we would love to hear from the audience. We had a few during the presentation, but now it's the time to brainstorm as a community and hopefully move this discussion forward. I know, for instance, one of my questions I have for you is policy. What are your hopes in terms of policy out of this consortium, and what are you hoping to achieve with that?
I guess I'll start. We're hoping to achieve a lot. We do have 3 fairly seasoned policy people sitting on the consortium, and they're very excited about moving this forward. Right now, it's hard for me to be really specific because it's still very conceptual. But our job now is to narrow this down into what we're calling like short, medium, and long-term goals, so that we start seeing change in policy fairly quickly.
One of the audience members asked, how can we follow along with this study?
Well, as soon as the report is out, maybe Pascal, we can send it to you. It'll be public. And so we'll make sure that you get a copy, and I'm sure you'll be able to post it.
Of course, we'll put it on the website.
Also, Kids Brain Health Network is the research network I'm associated with, and usually I'm quite quick at publishing my results, not in a manuscript. I do that too, but you know, in a way that's available for caregivers as quickly as possible. But it's like, again, it will be, you know, maybe not necessarily what people want to hear, like practical strategies. Will be information on, okay, did this work? What needs to change for people with FASD in this specific intervention? And I'm hoping we'll have more than one cohort so we can build on that knowledge and make it better. Also, to answer Nancy's talking about, yes, this is not something that ends at 18, and so true. Like I said, I'm using the word children, youth, young adults. And then VR was also adapted for, they call them entrenched adults. This is something they see a lot in the autism population, whereas the adult child still lives in the home. And there was adaptation created, you know, to make a safe environment for the adult child, but sometimes it's too much, and then they need to change the patterns. It's really interesting, and I think we have a lot to learn from what they're doing. It's true. This is
And I
something.
think even, consortium wide, and I know that the University of Ottawa study as well, although it says youth and adults, young adults, it kind of ends it at 18. The researcher has actually said she would be more than willing to have parents of adults who are struggling talk to her. And the reason why I would suggest that we do that is because at least then she can document those as things that need to be addressed specifically. And also in the consortium, we'll have kind of a section of other issues that need to be dealt with. Maybe we need to broaden the perspective or the lens, or so we're hoping, of course, for some people, the aggression ends or kind of naturally comes to a lower level in adulthood, but for many that doesn't happen. When we're looking forward, we're trying to get non-entrenched behavior, so get at them earlier will be one of the goals, but we know that that's not always going to happen. And so we need to have ways of helping families that are struggling well into adulthood.
Someone said all the kids do this. I've heard also not a comforting response. I wasn't understanding it at first, the French thing. But what I think she means is like when there's families share this, and then the other person would say, oh yeah, all the kids do this. And that's when when I was talking about my spectrum, I think that's what she means. It's when for some people, it's not clear the level of aggression that's happening, the level of
Yes, yeah.
the event being so traumatic, and people just kind of like don't validate it, just downplay it, like, oh yeah, they do that, but no, they don't. And Lauri and I, we talked about this, like we don't really have, the therapists don't necessarily have a way of assessing that properly.
Yes.
Like what's the level of danger here, right?
Yes.
And
I found in many meetings, people are uncomfortable with it. So you'll be sitting with a group of people that are supposed to be there to help us, and there's silence when you start talking about it. And so, I get it that they don't know what to say, but when you're experiencing that, it's a reason why you just stop talking. So we have a lot of work to do in educating our professionals, our supports, the people that are supposed to be there to help us be successful, for sure.
I know, for instance, someone asked at the beginning, we didn't get to that question, what do you define by aggression, violence, and how do, I may follow up on that one, how can professionals assess whether or not this is something worth an intervention? What's the hard line that will say this is where it's too much?
I mean, keep in mind, we're not looking for a diagnosis here, but Maude, do you have that slide at the end? Remember we have one right at the end, and it's a very interesting question. It was one of the questions we went out and asked families, and we got quite, there's a graph there. I don't know if we still have a few minutes to show it, right? So we talked a lot in it. There, what does it look like? So if you look at, so the consortium members would be the 15 people, as I said, that represent, social services and therapists. And then on the brownish one, the N71, is actually families responding. And we were happy to see that it's not significantly different, but if you look at what they feel fit in, one of the things, that really stood out for us was the threat is quite high for parents that are living with this in their homes, or for the other people living in the home. And there was also this idea of harming themselves, and what the conclusion was sometimes the harming themselves comes combined with the threat to others. So maybe that answers your question. I mean, it doesn't give you the technical answer because we don't really have a formal definition in Canada yet, but based on the recommendations of the consortium, you can see basically what we're coming out as looking at. So there'll probably be in a definition in the final report that'll have like primary features, and there'll be some of these higher things: hurting others, threat of hurting others, and then some other ones of possibly emotional injury or harming to self.
Someone in the Q&A said, is there any suggested reading or training we can suggest to families and teachers? I've quickly plugged the service provider training again. Do you have any advice or suggestions specifically to aggression in the home?
We also have some videos at Adopt for Life. I think Julie is here and she may be able to post them, the executive director at Adopt for Life, or we can send them on later. But we have had an individual, a parent from who works in the area from the UK, who's done some webinars with Rebecca, who works at Adopt for Life. And I think they're really good. I think most of our families, the feedback was that they were helpful, and they're available on the public website. I'll try and Google and see if I can find it.
Called CPVA, the one on the YouTube, Adopt for Life. And I did one in French on at the symposium, Dangerous Behaviors.
And one for, I did one with Nancy Lockwood on safety in the home, and one with you, Maude, in French, I believe, as well. So I'm going to post the French link as well in the chat. Okay.
Thank you, Pascal. In terms of NVR, however, there's nothing published that will be trauma informed for now. I'm hoping soon we'll have something. And someone was talking about first responders and the police. When I was with Nancy Lockwood, part of the fetal alcohol resource program in Ottawa, we were training first responders in the police. We also had this program where children could, that's children and adults, who could have medic alert bracelets. So if they come into contact with the police or first responders, then they're in the system, and then it says how to interact with the individuals to, for example, de-escalate, speaking calmly, things like that, talking about. We have found that there's a lot of turnover. There's so many police officers to train. So I'm still thinking about, okay, what's the best way to have all these first responders trained? And it's not just FASD, it's impossible that they will know all the neurodevelopmental disorders. It's just, honestly, I don't have a solution yet. Like in British Columbia, in Vancouver, when I was living there, we had social workers going in with the police for these types of calls. So that might be a solution that we don't have here in Ontario. I don't know.
There's another question in the Q&A. Do you have any suggestions for helping local police force understand what it is happening in these homes, particularly the children become stronger and larger than their parents, especially with transition to adulthood? And I know it's interesting because I was presenting today and yesterday on justice and FASD. So it's a question that people don't think about asking, but a lot of caregivers, as their child grow into teenagers and adults, are more and more concerned with that. So what would you answer to that question?
Well, like I just said, I don't have a specific answer other than they need training. How to do that, I don't know. And I would say in the responses that we had in the consortium from families, I never thought about it this way, but they said, like in British Columbia, they were quite happy with the police, I think because they come with a social worker. So it's happening better way, it's more supportive. But they said, then the problem is still there. They come, there's an outburst, but then
yes, it's a short-term solution.
Yeah, it's a short-term solution.
Yeah.
It's something we're looking at as well.
I mean, if it gives you any hope, the Probation Association of Ontario has asked us to come and talk to them about aggression in childhood towards family members. So, I mean, it's coming. It's just, we're right at the beginning. And I know that sounds terrible, but I think the awareness will come, but it's going to take a while. Right now, we have a police officer on the consortium from New Brunswick, and he's amazing and, you know, very open and very into restorative justice. And, you know, so it really depends who you're dealing with right now. And we definitely have to get that information more widely known and understood.
Thank you so much for being here tonight, and see you during our next webinar in November with Better Nights and Better Days on sleep and FASD.